You ever have one of those neighbors who think they run the whole street like it's some personal kingdom? Mine's named Karen. And no, that's not a joke. Her actual name is Karen. She's the walking definition of the stereotype. The kind of woman who trims her bushes with a level, memorizes the HOA bylaws like they're scripture, and files complaints with more passion than most people order pizza. She's got that look-too-sharp sunglasses, pastel-colored windbreaker, and that ever-present clipboard tucked under one arm like she's on some holy mission. Her mission? Making sure no one in the neighborhood dares to step out of her idea of suburban perfection. I moved in 6 months ago. Bought a fixer-upper on the corner of the block Hold Bones. But good land, big yard, and best of all, a beautiful, towering maple tree right near the back fence. This tree was the kind you'd see in postcards, especially in the fall. Bright orange leaves, strong limbs, a trunk wide enough you couldn't wrap your arms around it. My dog loved to nap in its shade, birds nested in its branches, and squirrels would hold entire drama-filled family reunions on it. But Karen? That tree with the intensity of 1,000 suns? At first, she just muttered about it. Little passive-aggressive comments when we passed each other in the street. Some of us like the sun, she'd say. Or, guess who has to rake your leaves every year? I'd just smile and keep walking. I'm not one for neighborhood feuds, but Karen. She collects grudges like trophies. Things escalated on a Saturday morning. I was sitting on my porch, coffee in hand, enjoying the bird song and the soft breeze rustling through that glorious maple. The sky was just warming up with the first gold hints of sunrise. That's when I saw her, marching across her perfect lawn, clipboard under her arm, lips pursed so tight I thought she might snap. She didn't even pause at the sidewalk. Straight onto my porch like she owned it and stood right in front of me. "You've got 14 days to remove that tree," she declared, handing me a thick paper packet. "It's an eyesore. It's damaging my driveway. It's dropping leaves all over the place. And per the HOA Code Section 12.4, Subclause C, you're in violation. We're prepared to take legal action if it's not gone within 2 weeks." I blinked at her, genuinely stunned. "You want me to cut down a tree because it's dropping leaves?" "It's not just the leaves," she snapped. "It's blocking my sunlight. Property value is being affected. It's probably a danger those roots could be undermining my entire foundation." I tried not to laugh. I really did, but it slipped out. A short, sharp burst I couldn't hold back. She looked like I'd slapped her. "Are you laughing at me?" she gasped, stepping back. "I'm just surprised, Karen. It's a healthy tree. Been here longer than both of us. You want me to murder it over shadows and acorns?" "Serious," she said, voice rising. "You're not above the rules. You'll be fined, heavily. And if you ignore this, we'll go to court." With that, she slapped the official-looking notice onto my mailbox and turned on her heel. I watched her march off like she'd just declared war and was confident she'd already won. I stood there for a moment, staring at the paper. It looked legit, complete with HOA letterhead and outlined complaint, and a schedule of escalating fines $100 per day after the 14-day deadline. It even included a threat to put a lien on my home if I didn't comply. The whole thing felt surreal. But what Karen didn't know, and this is where the story takes a sharp left turn, is that 6 months ago, when I bought this house, I didn't just buy this lot, see? The previous owner was in a bind and wanted to offload a few properties, all at once. The deal came with 2 rentals on the next block over. I'd never planned to be a landlord, but the price was good, and the cash flow helped cover renovation costs. One of those 2 rentals, the cute beige house with white shutters, occupied by none other than Karen herself, I know. Urine nearly made me choke on my coffee. At the time, I hadn't thought much about it. The property manager handled everything: rent collection, tenant contact, lease agreements. I just signed the dotted line. But now, knowing that the woman threatening to sue me over a tree was technically my tenant, that was priceless. Still, I didn't want to be petty. I figured maybe she didn't realize the ownership had changed. Maybe the property manager hadn't updated her. So I decided to clear the air. The next day, I printed out the deed transfer documents, highlighted the parcel numbers, pulled a copy of her lease from the management portal, and walked over to her place. She answered the door like she always did, one eye narrowed, one hand already on her hip. "I'm not interested in whatever you're selling. Not selling anything, Karen. Just thought you should know. I own this place now, as of 6 months ago." She stared at the documents in my hand, but didn't reach for them. "Is this supposed to scare me?" "Nope," I said calmly. "Just figured it'd be awkward if you sued your own landlord. Might create some tension."
How?
Her face didn't move. For a full 10 seconds, then she snorted, waved me off, and slammed the door shut. I could hear her locks clicking. That's when it clicked for me too. This wasn't about a tree. Not really. This was about control. Karen was the kind of person who needed to feel powerful. She liked being the one who knew the rules, enforced the rules, bent them when it suited her. And now she'd picked a fight with someone who quietly had more leverage than she could ever guess. But I wasn't going to play her game. Not yet. Let her send her letters. Let her threaten her lawsuits. Let her rattle her saber. The tree wasn't going anywhere, and neither was I at first. I really did try to handle things the mature way. I figured this was a classic misunderstanding. Maybe Karen didn't realize I now owned her rental house. That seemed likely, especially since she never dealt with me directly. All her rent went through the property manager, and I kept a low profile. So instead of retaliating or mocking her, I calmly handed her the paperwork showing I was now her landlord, thinking that might put an end to this ridiculous feud over a tree. But Karen wasn't interested in resolution. She didn't even bother looking at the papers. Just brushed me off like I was trying to sell her a vacuum cleaner and slammed the door in my face. That should have been my warning sign right there. She wasn't going to back down, not because she was right, but because she couldn't stand to lose, especially not to someone she saw as a newcomer on her street. 2 days later, I found a new notice on my mailbox. It was from the HOA. A formal complaint had been filed about my maple tree again. This time it wasn't just about leaves or roots. Karen had gone out of her way to dig through the HOA's rules and cherry-pick clauses that she thought might apply. She claimed the tree violated community landscaping aesthetics, posed a safety hazard, and interfered with neighboring views. Each accusation was more laughable than the last. I knew I had to respond. So I wrote a letter of my own, backed by an arborist report I'd already had prepared the year before when I was fixing up the place. The report stated, in very official language, that the tree was healthy, stable, and posed zero threat to surrounding property. I sent copies to the HOA board with a calm and respectful message attached. Please see attached expert report regarding the health and safety of the maple tree in question. You'd think that would have been the end of it. You'd be wrong. Karen didn't stop. She called the county office and claimed I was violating some obscure municipal code. She even tried to get the city involved, saying the tree was too close to a public path, which, by the way, wasn't even accurate. It was on my property, and I had the survey to prove it. Then came the most absurd move yet. She put up a homemade sign in her front yard that read, "Danger Zone, Falling Tree Area, Unsafe Neighbor Ahead." I nearly choked on my coffee when I saw it. It was laminated, stapled to a wooden post, and planted right next to the sidewalk, facing directly at my house. That's when I knew she wasn't just being petty. She was actively trying to damage my reputation in the neighborhood. She was framing me as some careless, rule-breaking homeowner. I was new on the block, and she wanted to make sure I didn't. Forget it, asterisk, but I had a card she didn't know I was holding. Actually, I had several. I called up my property manager and asked for a copy of Karen's current lease agreement. I wanted to know exactly what she'd signed, what rules she'd agreed to, and most importantly, whether she was in violation of anything. Turns out she was. For starters, she'd installed a secondary fence in the backyard without approval. That was a breach. She also had an unregistered long-term guest, someone who'd been staying there for months without being added to the lease. That was another violation. And she'd made structural changes to the landscaping around the front, without notifying anyone, something strictly prohibited in the lease terms. Now, I had leverage. Not that I wanted to evict her yet, but I needed her to understand she wasn't the sheriff of the block. She was a tenant. A tenant picking a very loud fight with her landlord. With all this in my pocket, I requested to attend the next HOA board meeting. Normally I wouldn't bother, but I figured if Karen wanted to drag things into the public eye, might as well show up and speak for myself. The meeting was held in one of the board members' living rooms. Complete with plastic chairs and lukewarm lemonade, Karen was already there when I walked in, seated up front like it was her courtroom. She had a folder of documents, a tablet, and that ever-present smug look that made it clear she thought she was about to win. When it was my turn to speak, I introduced myself calmly, thanked everyone for their time, and handed out copies of the arborist's report. I explained that the tree was protected by the county's heritage ordinance. It stood for more than 50 years and was not only safe but also legally shielded from arbitrary removal. I pointed out the inconsistencies in Karen's complaints and even included a photo of her ridiculous danger zone sign, which earned a few quiet chuckles from the board. Then I dropped the final piece of information. I also think it's important for the board to be aware, I said, keeping my voice even, that Karen is currently my tenant. I purchased her property 6 months ago as part of a bundle sale. Her lease is now managed under my portfolio. The silence that followed was one of the most satisfying moments of my life. You could practically hear her ego deflate. One board member actually blinked and turned to look at Karen like he'd just learned. She was living on borrowed time. Karen's mouth opened, then closed. For once, she had no words. I'm not looking to create conflict, I continued. I just like to live peacefully. The tree is safe. The law is on my side. And I believe tenants should also be respectful of their community and of their landlords. I didn't need to say anything else. The board members nodded, murmured their agreement, and quickly moved on to the next topic. Karen stayed frozen, in her seat, face like a stone mask. When the meeting ended, she didn't even look at me, just gathered her things and left in a hurry, like she couldn't get out fast enough. The woman who'd spent weeks throwing threats and paperwork at me had finally run out of ammo, but I wasn't finished, not quite. The next morning, I instructed my property manager to send Karen a formal lease violation notice. It was polite, professional, and very clear. The unapproved modifications had to be addressed within 30 days. The unregistered tenant needed to be added to the lease or vacate. Any further neighborly harassment would be documented and used to determine whether her lease would be renewed at the end of the term. I didn't say a word to her directly. I didn't have to. The message had been received loud and clear. Karen had gone to war over a tree, but she never stopped to check whose land she was standing on. That HOA meeting changed everything. Karen, who had strutted in, confident, prepared, to steamroll me in front of the neighborhood board, had been completely blindsided by the revelation. It was one thing to file bogus complaints and flex HOA rules like she was the queen of the cul-de-sac. It was another thing entirely to find out she'd been filing them against the very man who owned the roof over her head. After that, she went quiet, suspiciously quiet. No more angry signs, no more HOA memos slipped under my door. For the first time since I'd moved in, her curtains stayed drawn. Her usual early morning yard patrols vanished. She even started avoiding me entirely. It suited me just fine. I wasn't trying to be cruel, but I also wasn't going to let her off the hook so easily. She hadn't just complained. She'd lied, exaggerated, manipulated. She'd gone out of her way to publicly humiliate me over something as natural and harmless as a tree. And she had used the HOA as her personal tool of war, without ever once trying to talk like neighbors. That kind of behavior doesn't get fixed overnight. It needed a consequence. Something real, so I followed through. My property manager sent a formal lease compliance letter to Karen. It wasn't vindictive or overly aggressive. It simply listed, in bullet points, all the lease violations we'd found, the unregistered tenant living with her, the modifications she'd made without approval, like the makeshift back fence and the landscaping work that had clearly gone outside the original yard lines, and a strongly worded reminder that harassment of other neighbors was considered a breach of lease conduct expectations. She was given 30 days to correct everything. Submit a request for modifications. Register her tenant. remove any unauthorized installations. Failure to comply would result in non-renewal at the end of her lease term, which, as it happened, was just 2 months away. I didn't get a response. Not directly, but little changes started happening. The extra guy who I assumed was her boyfriend or son vanished. The backyard fence came down overnight. The front lawn, which she'd previously micromanaged into a sterile golf course. Aesthetics started looking normal. Less obsessively trimmed. Less obsessive. Period. Then came the cookies. No joke. One Saturday morning, I opened the door and found a plastic-wrapped plate of supermarket cookies sitting on my porch. No note. No explanation. If I knew exactly who they were from. It was such a strange move that I actually laughed. Karen, who once called the HOA on a neighbor for leaving a garden hose out too long, had left a peace offering. And sure enough, later that afternoon, she showed up on my sidewalk. No clipboard, no sunglasses, just Karen, looking more human than I'd ever seen her. I think we got off on the wrong foot. She said, arms crossed but voice quieter than usual. I nodded slowly. You could say that. I didn't know. Well, I didn't realize you owned the property, and if you had, she hesitated, glancing at the tree, which was still standing tall and beautiful behind me. I probably would have handled things differently. Probably. I smiled just enough to keep it from being a challenge. She looked sheepish. Maybe I went too far, but I take the HOA rules seriously. I just wanted things to stay in order. Get it? I said. But next time, maybe talk to people before threatening legal action. Especially if they might be your landlord. She actually chuckled. A small, dry sound, but genuine. Lesson learned. I didn't invite her in, and she didn't ask. The conversation lasted all of 3 minutes, but it felt like the war had finally ended, or at least entered a cold truce. Honestly, that was all I needed. Over the next few weeks, the atmosphere around the neighborhood shifted. Karen still kept to herself, but she wasn't patrolling like before. And the clipboard was gone. The passive-aggressive flyers and warning notes on people's doors stopped entirely. It was like someone flipped a switch in her. Maybe embarrassment did that. Or maybe it was the realization that her crusade had backfired harder than she ever imagined. Whatever it was, I took the win. As for the tree, it flourished that spring. Its branches filled with blossoms, then burst into a full canopy of green. Neighbors who had once eyed it with Karen's paranoia now waved to me from under its shade. Some even asked if they could set up a picnic under it or hang a swing for their kids. I said yes every time. Let them enjoy it. That tree wasn't just mine. It was part of the neighborhood now, a quiet symbol that sometimes standing your ground is worth it. A month later, the lease renewal letter went out. We offered Karen a chance to stay, but with a slight rent increase. Extreme, just enough to reflect the market and remind her that actions have consequences. She accepted it. I was surprised, honestly. I thought she'd move rather than live with the reminder that she'd lost her turf war. But maybe something had changed in her. Or maybe she just really liked the house. Either way, the war was over. I got to keep my tree. She got to stay in her home. The HOA never bothered me again. In fact, I even got invited to one of their barbecues later that summer. Karen was there too, making small talk with someone about hedges or something equally unimportant. She caught my eye across the lawn, gave me a tiny nod. I returned it, and that was it. No revenge, no screaming match, no dragged-out legal battles. Just a battle quietly won by a man with the right paperwork, a bit of patience, and a whole lot of irony on his side. In the end, Karen taught me something without meaning to. Sometimes the best response to petty power trips is quiet, firm authority. Not noise, not escalation. It's just truth and a well-timed reminder of who actually holds the keys.